Good afternoon. I hope all of you joining us today are safe and healthy. My name is Hamed Alavi, and I'm the chair of the ACM SwissCHI chapter in Switzerland, or SwissCHI as we call it. I'm here with the organizing team of this event, and I'm pleased to welcome you virtually to this first SwissCHI conference. As many of you know, with the onset of the pandemic, the CHI conference this year canceled almost all of what was programmed. Therefore, SwissCHI decided to organize a replacing collective opportunity for scientific exchange and invited the HCI researchers in Switzerland who have a paper accepted to CHI conference in 2020 to present a brief summary of their works in this online conference. All of the 12 full papers and 6 late-breaking works that were going to be presented in CHI by researchers in Switzerland will be presented in this virtual conference. So I should here thank all of the authors and speakers who showed interest in giving a talk. I also would like to thank our session chairs from the same Swiss scholarly community who accepted to moderate the sessions of this conference. So this conference is planned to be held in 6 sessions, 3 sessions today and 3 sessions tomorrow afternoon. I will let our session chairs to describe the topics of the sessions and the mechanics of the individual sessions. I should also mention that this is our first attempt to organize a live virtual conference. So please bear with us as the technical and logistic challenges of creating an online format may become clear. So this event is also an occasion for SwissCHI to share reflections and collect ideas around its agenda. We would like to ask you, if you are a member of the HCA research community in Switzerland, to join us in a discussion that we plan to have at the end of the conference tomorrow in the format of brainstorming on Zoom. If you cannot join, we have made available an online form that you can use to share your comments and feedback with us. The topic of our discussion tomorrow will be about the mission and vision of Swiss ACM SwissCHI chapter as an umbrella organizing entity that aims to ensure a pioneering position for HCI research in Switzerland. So we will cover at least 4 points. First, on grants and fundings. How can we improve the relationship with national funding agencies such as SNF and InnoSwiss, but also with the European ones? There seems to be an embedded substantial role for HCI research in the new shift of attention and focus on digital life and digitalization in the funding schema. So how can we make sure that this role is present, not only conceptualized in interaction design research, but also in collaboration with colleagues in other departments such as social sciences and in interdisciplinary projects. Second, on more frequent and richer interactions among us. How can we improve the ways in which we share and exchange expertise, knowledge, and data, perhaps through topic-specific subcommittees in SwissCHI? Third, on teaching, how can we ensure that the interaction design students in Switzerland can benefit from all of the learning opportunities that may be available in different institutions, including university teaching and occasional guest lectures, but also workshop material and instruments for prototyping and user studies. And finally, we would like to discuss concrete next steps for SwissCHI, including upcoming meetings, and who would contribute to each of those steps. So these are some of the subjects that we think we should cover tomorrow. However, these can be extended as our discussion will develop. So again, I would like to invite you to the informal meeting after the closing session tomorrow at 5:15. There is a link on the SwissCHI website where you can register for that meeting, and then you will receive the Zoom link. So just before starting our first session, I would like to mention two more points. We invite you, all of the viewers, to ask questions during the broadcast. Please write your questions as comments here on YouTube. The session chairs will try to get to as many questions as they can from those comments. As I said, our day is divided into 3 sessions. We will take brief breaks between the sessions and try our best to stay on schedule. So you can also find the full program on the SwissCHI website, swisschai.acm.org. I thank you all again, the viewers, to be with us in such a nice and sunny day. I imagine almost everywhere in Switzerland. And with that, I would like to transition now to our first session of the day on smart interaction for health and well-being, and therefore pass it to the chair of the session, my colleague Chat Vacharamanatam, Professor of Interaction Design in the University of Zurich. Chat, if you're ready, I leave the floor to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today we have 3 wonderful articles about measuring health and motivating well-being. While I introduce the first paper, may I ask Lilana to start the screen sharing? Okay, so in the first paper, you will learn why it is important to measure fatigability, or how your arm could become tired. Why such measurement is important, you will also learn for people with multiple sclerosis. And you will also learn how can it be measured with a smartphone. The paper is titled A Rapid Tapping Task on Commodity Smartphone to Assess Motor Fatigability. It will be presented by Liliana Barrios from ETH Zurich. Her co-authors for this work are Pietro Odrati, David Linderbauer, and Christian Holz from ETH Zurich, and also Mark Hutty, Helen Hayward-Kronecker, and Andreas Lutherhot from the University of Zurich and the University Hospital Zurich. Liana, you have 10 minutes for this presentation. Please start when you are ready.
Okay, so I hope you can hear me now. Thank you, Chat, for the introduction. So I'm Liliana Barrios. I'm here to present our work, A Rapid Tapping Task on Commodity Smartphones to Assess Motor Fatigability. So fatigue is a common and debilitating symptom of many autoimmune diseases, including multiple sclerosis. Up to 95% of MS patients complain about fatigue. Despite being a highly prevalent symptom, it's still poorly understood. Fatigue is defined as the subjective lack of physical and mental energy that is perceived by individuals or caregivers to interfere with the usual and desired activities. It is currently assessed through questionnaires like the Fatigue Severity Scale, which is a questionnaire that asks how's their fatigue perception in the last weeks. It has 9 statements that the person has to rate from strongly disagree to strongly agree. These questionnaires, they have the limitation that they are subjective and ask participants to make difficult retrospective analysis and this can hamper the development of treatment and understanding of fatigue itself. So how can we objectively measure fatigue? Fatigability, the objective decline in performance over time, might be the answer. So recently, researchers have found that there's an association between subjective fatigue and motor fatigability, in particular in MS patients. However, there's some inconclusive results, and mainly this is due to the lack of standard and ready available methods to assess fatigability. Currently, fatigability is assessed through, for example, hand grip dynamometers, 6-minute walk test, or the knee dynamometer. With these dynamometers, what we are measuring is the decline in strength in time. The limitation of these approaches is that they require specialized equipment and trained personnel to conduct the tests. Hence, finding ubiquitous and inexpensive ways to measure fatigability could be beneficial to understand the symptom of fatigue. Finger tapping is a technique widely used to assess motor impairment in Parkinson's disease. For example, tapping the index finger with the thumb is a standard clinical test to evaluate Parkinson's disease severity. Similarly, bradykinesia, a symptom of PD, is measured with a smartphone correlates with overall motor impairment. Alternating finger tapping on a keyboard is correlated as well with subscores of Parkinson's rating scales. So we propose to use rapid alternating finger tapping to assess motor fatigability. In our work, we have two hypotheses. And this is assuming that the person is going to conduct the task at maximal performance since the beginning of the task. The first hypothesis is that we expect to see decrease in grip strength when the person is using the hand grip dynamometer. The second hypothesis is that we expect as well to see decrease in performance in the tapping task, and this decrease in performance translates to decrease in speed while doing the alternative finger tapping. To test our hypothesis, we conducted a study with 35 healthy controls with no known autoimmune disease or symptom of fatigue, and with 20 multiple sclerosis patients with a disability status between 7 and 8. We conducted our study in a quiet environment. We introduced the task to the participants, and we allowed them to conduct several test rounds so they can get familiarized with the devices. The tasks were conducted with both hands, and between each task, we allowed a resting period of 3 minutes. As the baseline approach in our study, we used the Jammer hand grip dynamometer, which with this device, we asked participants to perform maximal voluntary contraction for 30 seconds, and we recorded the value every 3 seconds. Now I will show you a short video so that you can visualize how the hand grip works. The person is sitting straight with the hand grip dynamometer on the hand, and with the tablet application, we are storing the values coming from the hand grip dynamometer. Every 3 seconds, we get a new value. The person is required to make maximal contraction for 30 seconds. In our approach, the tapping task, what we ask is the participant to perform rapid alternating tapping tasks as fast as possible with a stop condition of 250 alternating taps. During this task, we record all the time touch events from which we can extract the touch duration of each tap. Now I'll present you a short video of our tapping task. While the participant is sitting straight, the person rests the hands on the table while performing the rapid alternating finger tapping on the screen. We can see a moving avatar on the smartphone screen. So for the data processing, in terms of the hand grip measurements, we took the 10 measurements and we did min-max normalization per participant per session. Similarly, we took the tapping data, and first of all, what we did was to remove the outliers standing 3 standard deviations away. We did a low-pass filter on the data, We did as well min-max normalization. And finally, we aggregated the data into 10 segments so that we could compare to the 10 measurements we get from each hand-grip session. In the data processing, we introduced the concept of trial validity. This is to make sure that each of the trials that the participants conducted are done performing maximal performance since the beginning of the task. That means we expect to see decreasing performance. In terms of touch duration, this translates as time progresses. We see higher or more time, the touch duration is increasing. There are two conditions for our trial validity, and that is we expect to see a positive slope, so the time is increasing in time. The touch duration time is increasing in time. We expect to see no more than 50% improvement on successive segments. So by fitting the line, we can see here that we have a positive slope. So this would be a valid trial. In this case on the right, we would have an invalid trial. So we can see that the mean duration is decreasing in time. That means the person is actually getting faster. So they're improving in time. So overall, we have a negative slope. So going to the results, we can see that as time progresses, we see declining performance in the tapping and hand grip tasks. So what we see here, this individual point represent a different participant, and this is each point is split in the segments. So we can see for the hand grip dynamometer, the trend is declining. For the tapping task as well, the trend is declining. Please mind that we have plotted here 1 minus the touch duration because we want the trend to be similar to the hand grip. So overall, for patients, we can see that both methods show the similar trend line. We see the same phenomenon with the controls. So for the control groups as well, we have the tapping data decreasing in time, as well as the hand grip data is decreasing in time, the performance. Overall, we have a mean Spearman correlation of 0.8. We notice that 215 alternating taps can be challenging depending on the level of impairment. So for some participants, this might be too long. Therefore, we studied how our tasks correlate depending on the task duration of the tapping task. So for the full task, we have seen that we have a mean correlation of 0.8. For 90 seconds, the correlation stays around the same, and the valid trials change a little bit. The same for 60 seconds, 30 seconds, and 10 seconds. Overall,
1 minute left for your presentation.
30 seconds is suitable to assess motor fatigability. So here we show the trend of the tapping and hand grip data, and we can see that for the patients, we have 0.8 correlation, and for the control group, 0.8 for the control group and 0.78 for the patients. So overall, 30 seconds is enough for monitoring fatigability. So now let's go to the conclusion. So more work is necessary in the future. We would like to explore other methods to an analysis strategy to ensure higher rates of valid trials. There's a need still for longitudinal studies and in the wild evaluations within subject comparisons to assess the use of fatigability. And we want to investigate the relationship between fatigability and subjective fatigue. So overall, we have introduced a novel approach to monitor fatigability on commodity smartphones. We show that there's significant correlation between the tapping task and the hand grip measurements. And this is the first step towards measuring motor fatigability without the need for specialized equipment. So our method might help quantify fatigue and complement the current assessment through subjective questionnaires. So with this slide, I would like to conclude my talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Liliana. Very good presentation. I like the fact that you show the figures that shows the correlation between the two data sets. Now we have 3 to 5 minutes for questions. If anybody have questions, you can type in the comment field in the YouTube, and I will bring up your questions to ask the authors here. While we are waiting for the questions from home, you said that your application actually shows a visual feedback for the tappability. Did you by any chance have tested an earlier version without any visual feedback, or what is the rationale for providing the visual feedback? Because I think having the visual feedback turns the tapping task from probably open loop motor control to a closed loop motor control. So maybe there is some rationale behind the visual feedback. Could you elaborate more about that?
Yeah, sure. Definitely, the main motivation for adding the visual feedback is that we want to have the app to do in the while analysis. And for many patients, having zero feedback was a bit demotivating because they just felt that they were tapping on a blank screen. So they wanted to have some kind of visualization, kind of for motivation mainly. So that is the main reason for the avatar.
Okay, yes, thank you very much. Any other questions from the audience? Meanwhile, while we are waiting for questions from the audience, could you maybe tell us about potential future works or maybe some things that are in progress now? Because I also see that some of the collaborators are also from university hospital. Will this have a potential to be a product in a near future?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that we want to evaluate now is, because this was all conducted in controlled settings, so in the hospital and in our office at the university. So what we want to see is the validity of this task in the wild. So what happened when we give this task to different group of patients and controls, and we ask them to do the task for a long period of time, and while they are not coming to the hospital, so basically under supervision. So we want to see if there's some kind of change in terms of validity, and also we would like to explore, of course, if there's any association between motor fatigability and fatigue, which is our ultimate goal, basically.
Indeed, that is an interesting direction and promising method. We have one question from the audience from YouTube. Neo Gaps, he or she asked, what was the overall qualitative feedback of the patients? Did they like your prototype better than other tools?
Well, there are not so many options. So we didn't actually did like an in-depth study on the perception of the application itself, but I mean, overall, no one really complained. So I guess it was positive in general. We did have some complaints in terms of the hand grip, because for some people it might be too heavy. So this was kind of an advantage on top of the application itself.
All right. Thank you very much for your talk and for your presentation.
Thanks.
All right. While I introduce a second paper, I would like to ask Gabriela or Mauro to share their screen for the second presentation. We have learned about how to measure tiredness from Liliana's work. In the next work, we will learn about the effect of motivational message, like those that tell that you need 3,000 more steps today before going to bed tonight. In this paper, you will learn how such message could influence your intrinsic motivation. This is a presentation from a Tokai article with the title, The Unexpected Downside of Paying or Sending Messages to People to Make Them Walk, comparing tangible rewards and motivational messages to improve physical activity. This work will be presented by Mauro Cherubini and Gabriela Villalobos, sorry for the pronunciation of the name. Both are from the University of Lausanne. The other two of the co-authors of this work are Marc-Olivier Baudy, also from the University of Lausanne, and Ricardo Bonazzi from HESSO. Mauro and Gabriela, you have 10 minutes for this presentation. Please start when you are ready.
Hello, do you hear me well?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay, thank you. I am Gabriela Villalobos Zuniga, and this is the unexpected downside of paying or sending messages to people to make them walk. So we all know that exercise is good for us, yet many fail at giving it the importance it deserves. Technology can play a major role in empowering users to overcome their natural limitations and to opt for healthy routines. Designers have taken this challenge, and today we can find thousands of apps on the market that aim at changing and supporting behavior-changing programs. We still lack, however, systematic design guidelines for these persuasive features that can help designers produce more effective apps. To identify strategies, we ask ourselves the following question: what motivates people? We know that some people are motivated by tangible rewards, and there are apps that actually offer tangible rewards to users for performing specific actions. For instance, in Green Apes, the user receives banknotes that are transformed into coupons for obtaining discounts on products. Others are motivated by apps that send regularly motivational messages to users. So, for example, in the Quit Stop Smoking app. So in this study, we were interested in understanding whether these two classes of interventions could support or hurt people while they were trying to set up healthy routines. Therefore, we ask, will tangible rewards and motivational messages help or hinder people in reaching a more autonomous level of motivation to perform physical activity? As a theoretical lens, we decided to focus on self-determination theory, or SDT. The theory posits that people have natural tendencies towards self-determined action. However, in order for this to happen, people require contextual conditions to satisfy the three basic psychological needs of autonomy, competence, and relatedness. Autonomy is about the need to control the course of their lives. Competence needs to be, it's the need to be effective in dealing with the environment. And relatedness is the need to have a close, affectionate relationship with others. So if we look at the two interventions that we have presented previously, SDT predicts that offering rewards will make people feel they are performing the action because an element external to them is at play, like in this case, an incentive. Specifically, this element might hinder the basic psychological need of autonomy. Concerning the motivational message, on the other hand, this can provide additional knowledge to the user, therefore supporting the basic need of competence. Now let's look at our hypotheses. First, we hypothesize that high motivation increases step counts. Second, that a fixed reward decreases motivation. Then that motivational messages increase motivation. As a third hypothesis, fixed rewards decrease step counts and motivational messages increase step counts. To test these hypotheses, we designed a basic research app. It was a step counter for iPhone that was reading steps from HealthKit. We set the same goal for all participants in the experiment, which is reaching 10,000 steps. And whenever this goal was achieved, the current count was turned blue. The research app was used in two experimental conditions. Fixed reward, where participants were given 60 cents a day if they achieved the goal. And in the other condition, a motivational message, where participants receive every day a motivational message with useful information of why walking was good for them. Now let's look at the experimental design. We tested the app in a longitudinal study with 160 participants during 10 months. We had 3 groups: the control group, the fixed reward, and the message group. The study had a pre-phase of 3 months, an experimental phase of 4 months, and a pause phase of 3 months. The main dependent variable was the number of steps walked by participants every day, and as an additional metric, we deployed a 3 times standardized questionnaire with the intrinsic motivation index, which measures how much participants are motivated toward the target activity. This is one of the main results of the experiment. Here you can see the temporal evolution for the average step counts for all people in each experimental condition. The first thing you will notice is that there are temporal patterns or seasonality. We see the summer exam session, the summer retake session, the beginning of the fall courses, the end of courses and holiday session. Then we have the winter exam session and the beginning of spring courses. Now let's look at our hypotheses. Validation. So the first hypothesis was about high motivation increases step counts. And this was partially validated. This was true for the pre-phase and remained true for the control group for the whole experiment. However, we noticed that for the other two groups, this association was perturbated by the intervention. Our second hypothesis about fixed rewards decreases motivation. This was validated. Then our second B hypothesis was motivational messages increases motivation, and this was not validated. And for the third hypothesis, this was not validated. So these two interventions had no effect on the physical activity. So what do these results actually mean? First, monetary rewards do not help establish lasting healthy routines. We could not confirm that predictions of the SDT theory or those of empirical studies for which a reduction of physical activity when receiving a fixed reward was expected. However, these results do not contradict the theory either, as it is evident that the monetary incentives we tested in this experiment did not increase the level of physical activity of the participants. Then paying participants to walk will decrease their intrinsic motivation. The intrinsic motivation of the participants indeed change as a consequence of the experimental manipulation. At the end of the experimental phase, the analysis indicated that the motivation scores of participants in the control group increased, whereas those of the participants in the fixed reward lowered. For the least motivated participants, the rewards increased the motivation scores at the end of the experiment. For the most motivated participants, it was just the opposite. In other words, an economic incentive can motivate people who are not yet interested in walking or running, but it can have the opposite effect on people who are already the habit of walking or running. So offering money to a person who is already motivated to perform a certain activity can confuse the person about their real motives. Sending motivational messages to participants did not increase their physical activity, but it increased their intrinsic motivation. Concerning the motivational messages, we could not observe any difference to the control group in terms of the number of walked steps. However, we observed a detrimental effect on the motivation scores measured at the end of the experimental phase. These findings contradict our expectations that were based on SDT and prior empirical research on motivational messages. This has to be interpreted by looking at how we translated the theory into design. Now let's look at the implications for design. So first, personalized interventions. Use the intrinsic motivation index or the questionnaire that we applied to establish the level of motivation at the beginning of the intervention. This would also help to assign optimal challenges to participants where the task is adjusted to their skill level. Second, create empowering interventions. So this is think in a long-term perspective. This is try to make the behavior to last for more time than what the intervention lasts. This can be done by avoiding creation of prosthetics for humans and instead empowering them to employ to their full potential. Better feedback. Feedback should be used to satisfy the basic psychological need of competence, and it should provide useful information that can help people reflect on their own performance and obtain a sense of effectiveness. So to sum up, let's look at the implications for design takeaway. So remember, 1, personalized interventions, 2, create empowering interventions, and 3, provide better feedback. So with this, I would like to conclude. If you have any questions, you can contact us later. This is a work that I did with my 3 other colleagues. This is the paper. If you're interested, go and check it out. And with this, I would like to finish my talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gabriela. So if you have any questions, audience at home, so at this point, we have 38 people with us. Ask your questions on the YouTube comment field, and I will relay your questions to Gabriela. So I have two questions for you while we are waiting for the audience. You mentioned that the motivated participants, when you give them monetary incentives, they reduce their walking steps towards the end. Could it be possible that those most motivated participants are eager and then they do more towards the beginning, and at some point they already see that the monetary incentive is already enough for them, therefore towards the end they are flaking out a little bit? What's your thoughts on this?
Well, this is something that the theory predicts. So basically, people can be motivated at the beginning with rewards. It all depends on the level of motivation. So if you are not so motivated to walk and then you start receiving rewards, this might push you to walk more. If you are already motivated and you start receiving rewards, then this might affect your motivation and then you will not want to walk more. An interesting thing is that, for instance, and this is something that we consider, but we cannot affirm, is that maybe if you provide more money to people, then they will walk more. But in the long term, this money might hinder their motivation. So it would affect the number of steps they walk every day.
If I can add something to this, Chat, I think in your question, you are implying that there could be like a ceiling effect on this financial reward. Now, from past theory, basically postulates that this isn't the case, basically, because people want to accrue more and more, and so the ceiling effect wasn't foreseen in past work, but it wasn't also seen into this the study that we did. I mean, there were participants that were actually very interested in getting their 60 cents throughout the whole study. So that didn't stop at some point. At least we didn't see any trends of that sort.
Okay, thank you very much for the clarification. So far, we have got one question from the YouTube. So I will switch to a question from Jose Mancera. Do you think in other potential incentives or rewards aside from money, in order to onboard more people to be part of the study or using your solution, any other forms of incentives or rewards apart from money?
So is the question is if we consider other type of incentives to onboard participants?
Yes.
Well, no, we didn't. We just used money, though we had another condition. There was a lottery. So instead of obtaining 60 cents a day, if they reached 10,000 steps, they got a lottery ticket that was played every week. So this was like another form of incentive, but in the end, it's already money.
All right. We have several more questions here. Anton F., could you elaborate to what extent the existing tracking apps looking into implementing those recommendations?
Well, there are little apps that implement these type of recommendations. However, for instance, I do know that, well, it's not a tracking app, but for instance, the Fabulous incorporates many of these types of recommendations from theory. But yeah, to my knowledge, that would be it.
Well, there is also Rantastic. I mean, we discussed this a couple of times. Rantastic delivers this sort of feedback messages at the end of the track, or once per week. It gives you like a summary message with that actually summarizes your performance for the week, and it's typically pretty well done in the sense that it's specific, it's task specific, and it's very actionable feedback that they provide in the message. So that actually has the advantage of building up on the competence constructs of SDT. That are the only two examples that come to my mind. Gabriela, can you think of any other?
No, I think those two are the ones we discussed.
Yeah.
Okay, so there are several more questions on YouTube as well as on Zoom. I would like to pick one last question, and then for the rest of the question, the authors will probably answer on YouTube. So a question from Tipaya Chintakovid. Is it possible that different modes of delivering motivational messages may affect motivation differently? For example, will motivational messages sent by friends will increase intrinsic motivation better than automatic motivation messages?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
That's an interesting question. So indeed, there's a problem with messages. The problem that, for instance, we had with our messages was that they were not task-oriented. So they didn't provide enough feedback concerning the walking activity. What this researcher is suggesting, it's interesting because it touches on relatedness. So for instance, if the person is receiving messages from someone that is important to them, this might touch on the need of relatedness and will hence it will support it.
So I guess the other point, if I can add, Gabriela, I think the comment is also pointing on one specific limitation of the current systems, is that we receive hundreds of notifications, of automated notifications every day, thousands sometimes. And so this is the notification channel is already overloaded with thousands of these messages. So I mean, it's a very good comment because, obviously this decreases the power of these messages. And sometimes they simply get unnoticed because people experience what it's typically called notification fatigue. And so obviously if we can find like a different relay channel to make them reach the target audience, that could have like an influence on their ability to persuade. For sure. We didn't test that in this experiment, but it could be good ideas for future work.
All right. I would like to thank Gabriela and also Mauro for the presentation, excellent slides, and also very enlightening answers to the questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
For the last presentation, I would like to ask Aditya to start sharing the screen. So in previous presentation, we talked about the motivations of doing something physically. In the last presentation, it is a late-breaking work about web browser extension for digital detox. To kind of like stop you from following a lot of news with COVID-19 and get a bit depressed. I was there, been there, done that. Anyway, this late-breaking work, the title is Designing for Digital Detox, Making Social Media Less Addictive with Digital Nudges. It will be presented by Aditya Kumar Purohit from University of Neuchâtel. This work is a collaboration with Adrian Holzer, also from the University of Neuchâtel, and Louis Barclay from Natch in South Africa. Aditya, you have 7 minutes for this presentation. Please start.
Can you hear me?
You are ready.
Am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Aditya, and I hope you are safe and healthy back home. I'm presenting a late-breaking work, Designing for Digital Detox, Making Social Media Less Addictive with Digital Nudges. So the social media concerns, excessive social media use concerns have been increasing rapidly, and around 210 million people are suffering from social media addiction worldwide. The problem is that the social media platforms are intrinsically designed to be persuasive. But the good news is that the same design principles could be used to mitigate these addictive features. Now, in this late-breaking work, we present the specific digital nudges that could be used to mitigate the addictive features of social media platforms. So let's go to the background and understand how do social media platforms are able to make people hooked onto on their platforms. There are 4 components to this to achieving this. The first is trigger, second is action, third is variable rewards, and fourth is investment. Trigger is a notification channel, like supplying cues to which a person could take an action when when he or she has sufficient ability and motivation. Then there are variable rewards. After the user has taken an action, a reward would be presented to the user on the platform. For instance, the reward could be as simple as new content by scrolling mindlessly. And the fourth, but not the least, is investment. So invested value could be the photos that we upload on social media, and the followers that we have on Twitter, the followers that we get by default. We follow people on Facebook by making friends, and etc. So to combat this problem, we designed these nudges, and as you can see on the right, specific component has special nudges to combat them, right? So the first is a default nudge. So the default nudge deviates from the default environment and turns the website off. So for instance, before you go to Facebook or YouTube, the website will be turned off by default. The next is a hiding nudge. The hiding nudge obscures the trigger so that it becomes harder to respond. So for instance, this is before and after. 1 is before, 2 is after. So before you had notifications and triggers, and now the hiding nudge obscures them so that it becomes harder to respond. Next is friction. Now, friction creates an opportunity to interact mindfully with the tailored content. As we all know, the YouTube provides recommendations on the side which are tailored to our own watching habits. And henceforth, this friction nudge creates an opportunity to interact mindfully. Now, to combat the other sections, we have pause reminders. The pause reminders break free users from the continuous scrolling. So after a user scrolls, if he keeps scrolling, bottomless scrolling, then he gets a message that you have already scrolled 10 screens, and by making so that it makes him mindful. Another nudge that could basically help reduce the variable rewards are rainbow timers. So here we used a feedback nudge, and what we did here is that we presented the time spent on a particular website in the form of colored rings. So the colored rings grew every 5 minutes you spent on a website. For instance, that's my Facebook page, and as you can see, I've spent very less time and I've spent 5 minutes. So a rainbow has grown on the bottom right of your screen. And this also combines the feedback nudge plus the negative reinforcement. And lastly, we have the unfollower nudge. So unfollowing someone on social media is actually a very strenuous task. So with a click of a button, you could basically unfollow all your friends on Facebook and reduce the investment that you have made on social media, and which will, of course, reduce the number of the content on your newsfeed. For the evaluation, we did a usability test with the 14 students, and the SUS score we achieved was 79.8, which is from good to excellent usability. The attractive 2 measures were positive, in specific, attractive, hedonic, and pragmatic. And also the application was neither viewed as cheap or premium. And with the actual users of Nudge, we asked them two specific questions on a 5-point Likert scale. Do you think that Nudge reduced the time spent on Facebook, and did it make Facebook more enjoyable? As you can see that the results were significant, and people strongly agreed that it made Facebook more enjoyable, as well as it reduced the time spent online. We also asked the participants, the actual users, what are the pros and cons of Nudge, and we received open-ended comments, and we coded the comments line by line, and the 4 themes emerged out of it. The first thing was automaticity, right? So users like when the software or the digital detox app has the feature that you can achieve automatically. For example, with simple one click, you can unfollow people on one go.
You have
So
1
you don't
minute
have to do it.
left, please.
Then we have mindfulness. So the app did make the users mindful of their web use. The one issue was of a privacy threat. Users felt that somebody took over their Facebook data. So one thing that the app designer should keep in mind, and customization. Users preferred that they were able to customize their own interventions for in the case of digital detox. So here we took a counterintuitive design approach to decrease the usability of social media platforms. And what was interesting was that using this counterintuitive approach, people still enjoyed Facebook and also felt that they reduced their time on Facebook. In the future, we plan on running RCTs on these particular interventions against each other. And I'm open for questions. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Aditya, for a wonderful and colorful presentation. So for the audience on YouTube who has a question for Aditya, please type in your questions in the comment field. Meanwhile, I would like to ask about the design choices. For each of the nudge that you have presented, they are wonderful ideas, but all of them are explicit changes on the user interface of Facebook. For example, changing how the title bar appears and removing some icons. And also, even when you give a pop-up that shows that you should not scroll more, you also give that pop-up explicitly. Is there any particular reasons to make this skill explicit instead of doing more implicit approach? For example, just make the news feed much slower to load.
Sure, Chad, and that's a good insight. We will surely consider it. Presently, while designing the Nudge plugin, what Luis and others we kept in mind was that we wanted to see when we give people externally a message, how do they respond to it? Do they treat the platform as they're not enjoying it anymore, or they're still okay with it and they are more accepting? But surely we will incorporate the idea of making it more slower.
All right. Another question is that Nudge, the name itself, is connected directly to one of the famous books that discuss this theory about nudge. Would it also be possible that because of the name of the software, people are aware of what was the intention of the software and kind of behave and also react in the opposite direction to increase the autonomy, according to the last presentation?
Well, sure, that's an interesting question. However, the 67 actual users that the data that we collected from, they installed Nudge, so we didn't force them, we didn't send them any emails. These are the actual users who have gone to Chrome Extensions web store and actually installed the plugin, right? And the 14 students where we introduced Nudge, there could be a certain bias there, but after the experiment, actually the students have gone ahead to use Nudge permanently with them. So sure, we would consider this. So we are careful with the naming and how we name our apps.
That is wonderful. I believe that your comment also answered Tiffany Kwok's question. It's not just publicly available now, and you mentioned on Chrome App Store, right? So the app is still online?
Yes, the app is online, and just search Nudge, and I think it's right on the top. You'll be able to find it.
All right, wonderful. Thank you very much, Aditya, for a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
So today we have had 3 wonderful presentations about how to measure fatigability by mobile phone, about how not to give the motivational message when you want people to walk more. And the last presentation was about Nudge, a web browser extension available on Chrome App Store now that you can use to prevent you from scrolling the endless news feed. So this concludes the first session. I would like to remind you that SwissCHI invite all of you in Switzerland to join a brainstorming session tomorrow at 5:20 to foster the collaboration among HCI researchers into Switzerland. The second session will start in 4:15. I would like the presenters of the next session to hang around so that we can check your audio. And we will come back for the second session at 4:15 p.m.
So hi everyone, welcome to this second session of the SwissCHI 2020 virtual conference. I'm Adrian Holzer from the University of Neuchâtel, and this session is about learning, knowledge, and epistemology. We have 3 full papers in this session. 2 of them about online learning, or let's say digital support for learning, which is particularly relevant in these times, and another one on transparency and reproducibility in research, which is also very interesting. So without further ado, I will introduce the first paper, called Sarah, the Lecturer, Improving Learning in Online Education with a Scaffolding-Based Conversational Agent. And this paper is co-authored by Rainer Winkler of the University of St. Gallen, Sebastian Hobert of the University of Göttingen, Antti Salovara from the Department of Design at Aalto University, Matthias Söllner of the University of Kassel, and Jan Marco Leimeister of the University of St. Gallen. And today, Rainer Winkler will present this work. Rainer, 10 minutes, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So hello everyone, my name is Rainer Winkler from the University of St. Gallen, and below you can find the access to the paper. You can click on the link or also scan the QR code. Yeah, and thank you very much for getting this opportunity to present here at SwissCHI. So what is our paper about in a nutshell? So we developed a multi-channel and scaffolding-based conversational agent and integrated it in an online video lecture. We compared our conversational agent with often implemented conversational agents and were able to show significantly positive effects in terms of learning outcomes. So our findings suggest that it's very important to incorporate scaffolding and also multi-channel mechanisms in conversational agents to improve meaningful interactions in online education. So why do we need scaffolding-based conversational agents in online education? What is very important now in these difficult times was also a big trend of the last year. So more and more students enroll in online education. In these learning scenarios, we have a very high student-educator ratio. So most of the educators use video lectures to transfer their content. This is a good thing because with video lectures they can reach a wider audience, but we also have some problems here because we know that from learning theory, individual interaction is crucial for learning success, but it's very hard to have these individual interactions in this kind of learning scenarios. So this is why conversational agents raised interest in the field. They might be able to partially solve the problem of providing individual support. So a lot of researchers implemented conversational agents in online education, for example, in online forums or as a reflection tool. But to the best of our knowledge, no research or there's no research about conversational agents layered on top of existing online video lectures. And with this paper, we want to find out if this kind of conversational agents are promising. As I've already mentioned, there exists a huge variety of conversational agents in education. So we have text-based conversational agents where students can click on buttons or type in text. We have embodied conversational agents that can use emotional gestures, for example. And we also have conversational agents that use voice to communicate. One of the most famous one might be AutoTutor. It's also very successful one from Grace Redall. Song et al. Reflection bots. So they use the conversational agent as a reflection tool in online education. And nowadays we see more and more research that use commercially available conversational agents such as Amazon's Alexa or Apple's Siri. Based on that related work and our identified research gap, we asked the question whether multi-channel and scaffolding-based conversational agents layered on top of existing video lectures are able to increase learning success. To answer that question, we derive 3 design principles from scaffolding and cognitive theory of multimedia learning. First of all, we divided between a main and sub-dialogue. So every time a student was not able to answer the question, they entered a scaffolding sub-dialogue, and the conversational agent tried to bring the students back on track with the scaffolding sub-dialogue. To implement that, we used a NLP framework called NLP.js, which proved to be quite successful in recent benchmarks. And we also incorporated multiple channels. So Sarah was able to communicate via voice. And the text, the spoken text, was then displayed on the screen, and the students were also able to communicate via voice. We tested the conversational agent named Sarah in a 2x2x2 research design. So every student received, or every student watched 2 different videos about programming with Python. And in every video, they interacted with a different kind of conversational agent. What you see here is the interactions, so the interruptions in a video. So this is the first video, and you see that Sarah interrupted the video 4 times. And this was the same for all kinds of conversational agents. So altogether, we had 4 different conversational agents. We had a non-scaffolding text-based one, we had a scaffolding text-based one, a non-scaffolding text and audio-based one, and our scaffolding and multi-channel-based conversational agent, Sarah. And to show you how this worked, I prepared a little demo video that I will show you now.
So print 123, prints out 123, print 98.6, prints it out. So these are just really the syntax of constants, and without constants we can't write really much.
How would you describe a constant?
A constant is a fixed value.
Yes, that's right. Constants are fixed values such as numbers, letters, and strings. What different types of constants exist?
Strings and numbers.
That's right. We differentiate between string and numeric constants. What is the difference between these 2 types in Python?
I don't know.
No problem. Let me help you. String constants are texts, whereas numeric constants are numbers. String constants are texts, whereas numeric constants are numbers. Please say next to continue.
Next.
Okay, so what you saw now was our conversational agent named Sarah, and also the other types of conversational agents. I will continue with the main results and learnings from our studies. So we were able to support hypothesis 1A that the scaffolding mechanism has significantly increased information retention and also transferability. We were not able to support the voice manipulation hypothesis for information retention and also for transferability. But interestingly, we saw an interaction effect between the scaffolding mechanism and the voice manipulation for information retention as well as for transferability. What you see here are our descriptive results. So students that interacted with Sarah were able to score 77.8 out of 100 points at our post-test. For information retention and for transferability, they scored 65.4 out of 100. We conducted an ANCOVA with pretest results as covariates, and here we see that for information retention as well as for transferability, there are significant results for the scaffolding manipulation. You see here the different error bars. Every time when the error bars are not crossing the 0 point, it means that the difference is significant between the two treatment groups. So for example, for information retention, we see scaffolding and the control group, and here there's a significant difference. And here you see the mean difference for the voice manipulation. Our findings confirm past research regarding the scaffolding effect in a new setting, so in the online video lecture setting. Then we also claim to equip future conversational agent designs with speech recognition mechanisms, and we also showed that publicly available NLP frameworks are able to let conversational agents interact with students in a free manner. Our study also comes with some limitations, so we were not always able to detect the right or wrong answers from students, but we calculated the intervention selection accuracy score and scored 95%, which was quite satisfying. Then we evaluated within a laboratory setting, and this is of course a bit artificial. There might also be a technology effect, so students might have been over-motivated when interacting with this kind of conversational agents. And finally, we tested the conversational agents in a rather narrow context. So it might be that in other domains, there are different effects, or scaffolding isn't that strong, something like that. So they have different affordances, and it would be interesting to see similar research in other domains than a programming online course. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm happy to discuss my presentation with you.
Thank you, Rainer, very much for this great presentation. So yeah, feel free, those of you who are watching on YouTube, to post some comments. In the meantime, I was wondering, with those learning technologies, on one hand you have this the learning improvement, which is a great thing to look at. On the other hand, the question is always this thing of adoption, right? Like, would student adopt it, but also and more importantly, would teacher adopt it? And in your experience, have you tried to look at it, or what's your feeling about how basically you can get to lower the barrier of adoption of teachers, so that in the future they will use that? Do you see that this is something that applies to certain types of courses? Have you had some reflection around that you could share?
I think this is a very important question, and yeah, it's currently our next step, that we try to create a conversational agent platform that educators can use without any kind of programming knowledge, because I think it's very important to bridge the gap between the technical knowledge of software designers and also the didactical and pedagogical knowledge of these educators. So I think in order to spread these conversational agents across different domains, it's very important that we create tools that let educators create these conversational agents in an easy and very efficient way. So yeah, we are currently developing a better version of it. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Well, we have a question that Ahmed is asking. Can you imagine a similar study in a collaborative learning setting?
Would be very interesting. So last year we tried to implement Amazon's Alexa in a collaborative problem-solving scenario. So Alexa helped groups of 3 students to solve a problem task. It was also in a laboratory setting, and I think this is, we found some barriers. It's not that easy. It's more or less a process support for the students, so that they get more structure into problem solving. But I think in future it's a very important next step that we also use it in collaborative scenarios.
Great, thank you very much. I'll applaud.
Thank you
for everyone else. So we'll move on to the second paper. Called Transparency of CHI Research Artifacts, Results of a Self-Reported Survey. This is a best paper, and it has been co-authored by Chat Wachara Manotam, Lucas Eisenring. So Chat is from the University of Zurich. Lucas Eisenring is from INRIA Saclay in France, together with Steve Hauros as well, and Florian Echtler, who is from Bauhaus Universität Weimar in Germany. And the paper is looking at how in the community we disclose and share our the data and artifacts that we create. Very important insight. Chat, are you there?
Yeah,
I'm ready. You have 10 minutes. The floor is yours.
Yes. First, minor correction. Lucas Eisenring is also from the University of Zurich, but he is already graduated. So welcome, everyone. Today, I will talk about transparency of CHI research artifact. So this paper will look back into our field and see how we create and share our research material. But I would like all of you to take a look at one screen that you may be familiar with, Google Scholar, that we use to search for research paper. What you may see is that there is this word "stand on the shoulders of the giant" at the bottom. Actually, these words come from a philosopher, Bernard of the Chartres. It expressed the meaning of discovering the truth by building on previous discovery. It is just like even if you are a dwarf, if you stand on the shoulder, or in this case, on the head of the giant, you can see further away from being there yourself. It is important, and we all know that our research work built upon previous knowledge. The important events that also show this is the event that we face nowadays, COVID-19. The OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, say that open science policies can actually remove obstacles into the free flow of research data and ideas, and thus accelerate the pace of research critical to combating the disease. So sharing research material, sharing the data is important in helping the research community address the concerns. However, in the field of human-computer interaction, we are multidisciplinary. We come from different disciplines, each with different research methods. We have engineering, we have psychology, we have ethnography, we have design, and many more fields. How would CHI actually treat the material transparency? So we first have a look at what CHI research project could generate. We classify the types of materials into study materials. These are things that are created by researchers and presented to participants to elicit their responses. This could be stimuli for the psychometric studies. It could be a prototype that you give to participants to elicit their response and ask for their comments. We also generate data from such studies. These data could be raw data or data that are output from the data processing. And the data processing procedure could be something that is implemented in the software, such as R or Python script that performs statistical analysis, or it could be a coding manual that you use to code qualitative data. Lastly, in the field of SCI, of course, we generate a lot of prototypes, hardware and also software prototypes. Many of these prototypes are functional by itself. It could be prototype that illustrate the vision of what to come, or it could also be the system that are being deployed. So how is the research artifact sharing is practiced in human-computer interaction in CHI community in particular? We want to know that, so we asked the authors of the survey of CHI 2018 to 2019 to fill in a survey about what type of research artifacts that they generate, whether they share it publicly or not, and how do they share it. And if they could not share it publicly, we asked them why they could not share it publicly. We thank you all of the CHI authors for kind response of 460 response out of 1,356 invitations. These are 34 response rate. It is quite high. So we are very grateful for all of the authors who answer our surveys. So we found that CHI study materials are actually not shared that much. This chart breaks down into several categories. For example, study material, data, procedure to transform data or doing statistics, output data and software and hardware. And then on the horizontal axis, you see percentage among the responses. What the features that I would like you to look at in this chart is the proportion of the shared material is relatively low across the board to the not shared material. So this is the current snapshot of SCI community in 2018 and in 2019. And we really hope that after this presentation, after this paper is out, people discuss more about practice of data sharing and also other concerns, and also decide to share more of their study materials, of their data, and of their prototypes. In addition of this survey of the state of the sharing, we also asked the authors several questions about where they share their material, for example. Before I go to, before I present the result of the section, I would like to ask you one question in order to ask you to think about your research data. Think of one concrete research project now, and then answering this question. If the researcher want to use the data or the code from your paper, can they actually contact you to ask for that data and code? Do you agree with this statement? Now think again, if it is 10 years after you have conducted the research, will you be able to actually provide the code and data for people who request this? We are not the first people to actually ask this question. In the field of psychology, there was a team of psychology researchers requested the data from 141 articles published in prestigious psychology journals in the previous year, in the 1 year before the paper was published. So they have got only 27% success rate. There are like some authors simply don't reply email at all. There are people who refuse to share data. And at the end, we have like only 27% that shared, 11 shared after request and 16 shared after some reminders. Worse than that, researchers in the field of biology also found that the percentage of sharing is actually dropped along the age of the paper. As your paper get older, the odds of data that exists actually fall 17% per year. So from the CHI authors, we from our survey, for people who actually say that they are actually sharing the data, we see a large percentage across categories that they only share the data and materials only upon request from other researchers. Now, I would like you to also reflect on the second questions. Like, if your project have digital materials, do you think that putting the code or data on GitHub is a reliable way to share. So if you think that, yes, my code is on GitHub, it is great to share, I would like you to reconsider that when you go to the settings tab in the GitHub, you have these buttons that the repository can be made private, it can be archived, which will not be reachable, and it can be also deleted. Therefore, in this case, sharing on GitHub may not be the most reliable way to do. Additionally, GitHub is now actually owned by Microsoft. There were some news in several years before that Microsoft GitHub buyout is actually raised some fear, and we also have some researchers react to acquisition of GitHub. So at the moment, we are not sure whether this is a good thing for the long term or not, but previous experience may have a glimpse, it may show that it actually depends on the CEO. The previous CEO, Steve Ballmer, is actually think that Linux is a cancer. But the current CEO, Satya Nadella, actually favors open source software. Who knows what the next CEO will think. On the other hand, alternative to GitHub is to putting the code on open repositories such as Open Science Foundation or Zenodo. These website repository actually have long-term plan for you to share the data.
You have 1 minute.
My authors actually believe that sharing by GitHub only is a reliable method to share. So with this said, sharing is actually good for you. For example, 1 euro filter that has been published by Gary Cassius now have a lot of citation and have a lot of implementation. And if you want to share in the paper, we have listed 11 recommendations that you can have a look through, including the recommendations for the authors as well as for reviewers and for the shares. And that concludes my paper, the presentation for today. You should deposit research artifact on an open or protected repository. GitHub may not be a most reliable way to share. And from our paper, you can read more about the discussion of nuances such as data protection, anonymization, and see recommendation for the authors, reviewer, and program share. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chad, for this great presentation. I see we have a quick question from Mauro online. When you mentioned hardware sharing, Mauro wonders, how can you share hardware?
Yes, so when you have hardware, you may have schematics or the methods to create those hardware. For example, when you need to 3D print something or when you have to laser cut something, you might already have the templates or the model for those 3D printing or laser cutting. These are materials that people who will build upon your work or want to extend your work will greatly appreciate if you share online.
Great, thanks. And Anton is also wondering, what are the main perceived barriers for sharing research artifacts? What are the main differences of those barriers between quantitative and qualitative research studies?
This is a good question. I would like to show one slide that is actually a skip from the presentation. So we have the raw data. Sharing the raw data is actually a common concerns among people who collect data quantitatively. Here in the paper, we talk about it in terms of non-selective and qualitatively in terms of selective. So we see that these are the concerns that are usually share the same concerns. But for the data after processing, for the qualitative data, we see still a lot more concerns about the sensitivity of data for participants. In this paper, we did not propose a solution on how to actually solve all cases of qualitative data sharing. What we discussed about the amount or type of data that you should collect, and also what are possibilities of anonymization. And ultimately, if you cannot share the research data, it would still be good if you can write reasons to justify why you are not sharing those research data, because it will show that you are being careful about your methodology, and also people who learn from your research can be also learning about the concerns, data protection, and practice that you do as well.
Great.
Hey, Jack, can I butt in with a follow-up answer there? This is Steve Harose, one of the other co-authors. A common thing that we've seen is where part of the data might maybe have a privacy concern or maybe can't be shared, and then people don't share any of the data as a consequence. And that's especially the case, it seems, in qualitative data. That seems to be more often the case than with quantitative data. So one potential solution there is to be a little bit better at modularizing which parts can be shared and which parts can't be, so that if just one small portion can't be shared, you don't have to worry about people not sharing the entire set.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we're out of time for more questions, so thanks for the talk. And let's go to our third paper today. Again, a paper from the University of St. Gallen. The paper is called AL, an adaptive learning support system for argumentation skills. And this is co-authored by Timo Vapsgans from the University of St. Gallen, Christina Niklaus, also from the University of St. Gallen, Matthias Seto, as well from the University of St. Gallen, Matthias Söllner from the University of Kassel in Germany, Siegfried Handschuh from the University of St. Gallen, and Jan Marco Leimeister from the University of St. Gallen. And this is a paper who has received an honorable mention. So that's great. And it will be presented by Timo Vapsgans. Timo, the floor is yours. You have 10 minutes.
Thank you very much. So I'm Timo. I'm a PhD student in St. Gallen from the Institute of Information Systems, and I'm very honored to present you today our paper about an adaptive learning support system for argumentation skills. Before I start with my presentation, a short story. So what we see in discussions about papers, also in discussions with students, is that not anymore factual knowledge is the main reason how you convince somebody from your statement, but rather the lines of argumentation or how you structure the factual knowledge is rather more important. This is due to the fact that factual knowledge is not anymore only available in big books by only a limited amount of people, but available by smart devices which can be accessed anywhere. So here also in the discussions, if you want to Google like a statistic or a fact, you can just go to your smartphone, Google it, and then you have the factual knowledge. So this is reflected that argumentation is receiving more prominence. This is also shown the OECD Learning Framework 2030. This is a framework to show like OECD member states how they should develop their educational systems. And there are metacognition skills like argumentation, communication, problem solving is one of the 3 pillars for the educational systems in 2030. So we want to focus on this skill development of students. And in order to provide students to develop their skills, such as argumentation, very important is adaptive feedback and tutoring throughout the learning process. So this is naturally hindered since this one-to-one relationship is kind of hard in large-scale university lectures to fulfill, since the relationship is rather 1-20 or 1-100, right? And this is also growing by the rapidly increasing student numbers, also in massive open online courses, which got a recent push, and much more students are now getting access to education. So we believed, or our research objective was, how can we help students to develop argumentation skills by recent advances in natural language processing and machine learning, for investigating new opportunities for human-computer interaction, to help students to learn how to argue independent of an instructor, time, and place. So first of all, what is good argumentation? Argumentation is basically the notion how we communicate with each other, how we think, how we process knowledge. And the basic model is that an argument is consisting of a claim, this is a statement, and a premise, which might be a fact or an intuition or an example. And there are also more elaborated models like the Tolman model, where an argument consists of 6 parts. And the idea is that if you follow this structured argumentation, your statement or your text is more persuasive than if you don't follow this structured argumentation. And recent advances in natural language processing also bear the opportunities to extract these argumentation structures from texts, such as argumentation mining, where you can extract components, relationships, or discourses from text. So we asked, built this hypothesis that adaptive feedback on students' argumentation will help them to write more convincing text, and we wanted to investigate that with the research artifact and with creating design knowledge for adaptive learning support systems. So the idea is, like, a student is writing a text, for example, in any educational scenario, at your university or at your school, and the support system provides adaptive feedback so that the student can, write better persuasive text, and thus learns how to argue better, right? So we started our research with a theory and a user-centered approach. We went to theory and looked how our adaptive support system currently built, and we asked 30 students to share with us their experience with learning systems at a university, and how would they like to learn argumentation through such an adaptive support system. Besides, we also followed like a bottom-up approach, where we always derived iteratively prototypes, which we showed always to students to receive their requirements about the design and about the interaction on how to help them to learn the argumentation. One of the prototypes is depicted here. So a basic notion was that students want to enter a certain text with audio or text, and then receive like an feedback in the form of a summative scores, and then have the opportunity to dive more into the argumentation discourse and feedback, and then decide themselves what they take from that, right? We summarized these requirements as design principles, also reflected in our paper, to also show how other maybe adaptive support systems can be designed in a form for skill learning, right? So the major thing for creating then the artifact was to develop an algorithm which can detect the argumentative structures. And since we had no corpus available for German text, German student-written text, we created our own annotation guideline and created our own corpus of 1,000 texts, and did an annotation study and so on, that we can train a model based on these texts to fulfill the requirement to really help students individually to support their argumentation, since this was like the main requirement, that the feedback is very occurrent and very individual, and therefore we created our own corpus on that, right? The basic system worked like this, that the student enters a text into our system and then receives adaptive feedback from the argumentation model. Here the prototype is showing, or the system which we developed. On the left side, we can enter a text in German at the moment. A student in this scenario wrote a peer feedback on a business model to a fellow student. And then after entering his statement, he can click the Analyze button, and he will receive an instant feedback on his argumentation. He can always click on explanation buttons to see what are argument structures depicted. For example, claims are in green, premises in yellow, and then he can get to know the system better, right? This was also one of the major feedbacks we got in the prototyping sessions. Then he can click on the argumentation on his text and see how are claims supported by premises. For example, here one claim is supported by 3 premises, indicating that it's very persuasive, right? We also incorporate a graph view from the user feedback to show the complete discourse overview of the argumentation of their text, so that students can also go through the graph and click on the argumentative components and dive into. Moreover, we had the summative scores, for example, how argumentative the text is, how is the readability or the coherence, and students received different adaptive feedback messages based on the percentage of the scores, and could then elaborate for themselves if they take action. So now the students see that here's a claim which is not sufficiently supported by a premise, so it has no example, fact, or intuition. He goes to the text and he decides for himself that he will add an example here about this statement. This statement is now in German. It's about the transparency of this business model. And now he gives an example that the transparency is very important. During writing the text, there's like a small word count, which also helps like lecture scenarios. If you have like a certain amount of words students need to fulfill, and then you can click the analyze button again. The persuasive score now went up because he got like another argument supported, and he can see in his graph that the claim is now supported. To ever evaluate this prototype, or to evaluate our hypothesis, if this adaptive feedback helps students to write better argumentative text, we conducted a laboratory experiment with 45 participants. We had 2 treatment groups, one treatment group which received an adaptive support, and one treatment group as a control group which used an alternative proven scripting approach for writing arguments of Fisher 2013.
We have 1 minute left.
So students were writing argumentative text and got this support. And the results on the formal quality of argumentation and the perceived quality of argumentation indicate that people who got the adaptive feedback approach based on natural language processing and machine learning wrote significantly better formal arguments and also better subjective arguments. Just a small insight, which is not in the paper, but what we also did, we now embedded the system in our learning management support system in our university, and had an experiment going on with 200 students, which received over 2 months 9 feedbacks on their text, and we elaborated then their argumentative strength in another domain than peer feedbacks, and we could also show here significantly that in another domain their argumentation skills were better. To sum it up, we have some contributions for metacognition skill learning in large-scale and distance learning scenarios based on recent advances on natural language processing machine learning. We offer design principles for an adaptive learning support system and evaluation in laboratory experiments. We therefore also contribute to the OECD Learning Framework 2030, which calls for future work and future scenarios for more metacognition skill-based education, not only in Switzerland, but all over the OECD states. Thank you very much. If you want to access the paper, there's also the barcode and the link, and I would be very happy to collaborate with you.
Great, Timo. Thanks very much for this great presentation. It sounds very interesting. So for those who want to ask some questions on YouTube, the channel is open. Feel free to post questions there. I have maybe 2 quick questions. One, maybe, do you think it's something that can be extended for scientific papers where sort of claims are supported by references? And the other question is, a little bit like the red underlining of the text. It sort of improves your writing. You make less mistakes, but sort of doesn't really train you to become better at spell checking, right? As not doing mistakes, because basically you're thinking, well, anyway, it will be underlined in red, and I'll just pick whatever is correct. Do you think this type of system is something that people actually learn to make better argumentation, or it's something that we foresee as sort of an extension of Word or Google Docs that just underlines to show you, here is not a good argumentation, and you improve it because you get nice feedback with it?
Yeah, thank you very much for your question. So concerning the first question, actually argumentation mining is a field which is quite elaborated already for legal text or scientific texts, also called citation mining is like another subfield. And that is for sure possible. There are corpora available for that and trained models. You basically just need to build a model for that, and like a tool which helps you to do that, right? But yes, it would be possible. For the second question, it's a very good question. Therefore, we So our research was basically based on the cognitive dissonance theory or reflective learning theory, which says that students get like a feedback from a system, and then they create like they have a cognitive dissonance that they got like the argumentation is not persuasive how they thought it is, and they create, and this cognitive dissonance knowledge then says students then have the opportunity to create new knowledge by resolving this cognitive dissonance, by learning what they did wrong, right? So this is like this underlying theory which we embed the system in. But for sure, this can be hardly triggered or hardly or can be very much criticized. But as we also show in the second experiment, which we didn't publish in this paper, students really get better in this formal argumentation, at least, right? When writing text, also in other domains, right? Because they always get that feedback. But it's a big concern, yeah.
Thanks. I think we'll still just have one. Let's take one more question from chat. He says it's an excellent system. And could your model or data be used in reverse, drawing argumentation graph and generate text?
At the moment, no, because we trained the model at our corpus, and I think this is a completely different architecture. But maybe in the future, if you feed the model with a lot of text, that might be possible for future research. But from our current perspective, our model is not capable of doing that. Yeah, that's like a different field in natural language processing. Then, yeah, text generation. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. So we'll take a break and we'll be back at 5:15, so 15 minutes for the last session, realities, virtual, augmented, mixed. Thank you very much. See you then.
Welcome everybody to the third and last session of today on virtual, augmented and mixed reality. My name is David Lindelbauer from ETH Zurich, and we have two fantastic full papers and another fantastic late-breaking work. And this is again the last session of today, so stick with us here. So our first talk is going to be by Ying from ETH Zurich. It's on mixed reality remote collaboration. And the paper is titled A User Study on Mixed Reality Remote Collaboration with Eye Gaze and Hand Gesture Sharing, which is a collaboration between University of Zurich, ETH Zurich, and the University of Auckland. So Ying, you have 10 minutes, I'll give it away.
All right, so thanks a lot for your introduction, David. Hello, everyone. I'm Jing Yang from ETH Zurich. Today, we'll present our work, A User Study on Mixed Reality Remote Collaboration with Eye Gaze and Hand Gesture Sharing. And this work was led by Empathic Computing Lab in Auckland Bioengineering Institute. I guess we all have been working from home for quite some time, and we probably miss our face-to-face interactions with our colleagues and friends. In fact, for people who have to remotely collaborate with their colleagues, for example, in some industry maintenance scenarios, techniques that can support natural communication cues can be quite helpful and important. The development of telecommunication technology has facilitated remote collaboration with mixed reality technology. In an example mixed reality remote collaboration scenario, we have a real environment. And in the real environment, we have a local user. And the local user tries to finish something with the help of a remote user in the remote environment. So the local user might wear a AR headset, and the remote user might wear a VR headset. The local environment might be captured in a certain form and shared from the local environment to the remote environment and shown to the remote user, so the remote user can see what is happening around the local partner. And the communication cues from both users can also be exchanged with each other to help the remote collaboration task. So what do we do in this project? We have two major contributions. First of all, we develop a novel mixed reality remote collaboration system. This system can capture a 3D panorama of the local environment and share this from the local side to the remote side in real time. And secondly, this system supports two visual communication cues. One is hand gestures, another one is the eye gaze, as indicated by this pink ring here. And the system also supports awareness cues. So if your partner is not in your current field of view, we have an arrow to indicate where your partner is. And we also use a virtual avatar head together with the view frustum to indicate your partner's location and his or her viewing orientation. And the second contribution is we conducted a formal user study that compares hand gestures and eye gaze as visual cues with the conventional verbal communication in a live 3D panorama-based mixed reality remote collaboration task. Let's first have a look at the system design. To capture the 3D panorama of the local environment, we develop a sensor cluster. This sensor cluster has 8 RGB DAS cameras. And this sensor cluster is hung on the ceiling in the local environment. During the runtime, the scene captured by each camera in this cluster will be fused together to generate a complete scene of the local environment. And such 3D panorama will be shared to the remote side and displayed on the VR headset. So this sharing will serve as a virtual replica of the local environment. And the remote user wearing this VR headset can navigate him or herself freely in this virtual replica of the local environment. And this VR headset has a built-in eye tracker, and will also additionally attach a hand detector. So with these two sensors, the eye gaze and hand gestures from the remote side will be shared to the local side and displayed on the local user's AR headset. And as we said before, we also exchange both users' positions and their viewing orientations using virtual head avatars and viewing frustum. For implementation details of the system, please refer to our paper. So how does it look like when using the system for remote collaboration? Here I have a demo video. So in this corner, you see this is the display for the local user on the AR headset. So for the local user, you can see the remote partner's head, hand, and eye gaze. And on this side, this is the display for the remote user on the VR headset. So first of all, you can see that the surrounding environment is captured as a 3D panorama. You can also see a colleague walking here. And of course, the local partner is here. We can see the local partner's head as a virtual avatar representation. And by the way, this hand and this eye gaze here also came from the remote user. So the remote user can also see his or her own hand and eye gaze. And during the collaboration, the remote user used eye gaze and hand gestures to indicate, in this specific task, is to indicate which piece of puzzle to pick up and to tell the local worker where to put this puzzle. Can also use hand to show to put it a little bit forward or backward. And the local user, as you can see in this small window, can also follow the remote user's gaze and hand gestures and head avatar to find the next puzzle and bring it back. And the remote user can use hand to show the orientation and where to insert this puzzle. You can also give some positive feedback to your local user by a sum up. All right, so to evaluate the system's usability and users' experience with the system, we conducted a user study with 24 participants in 12 pairs. In the user study, we designed a Lego brick finding and replacing task. We designed the user study with 4 different queue conditions. The first queue condition, which was also the control condition, was verbal communication only. In this condition, both users could only talk to each other like in a phone call. And on top of verbal communication, we further add eye gaze share from the remote side to the local side, and hand gestures share from the remote side to the local side, and eye gaze and hand gestures both share from the remote side to the local side. With the user study, oh, and by the way, the order of these 4 conditions were shuffled in a random order to the participants. And all the participants did the user study with all of these 4 conditions. So with the user study, we want to answer 2 research questions. The first one was, how does the sharing of eye gaze or hand gestures from the remote user affect the collaboration in the mixed reality remote collaboration interface? And the second question was, what are the benefits of mixing both gaze and gesture cues for mixed reality remote collaboration compared with using each cue alone? We have a lot of interesting findings during the study, but due to the time limit, I would only discuss some major findings. So first of all, regarding the task performance, we measure the task completion time, and you can see when we integrated eye gaze and hand gestures, especially if we integrated both of them, participants spent significantly less time on the task. Well, this might be easy to understand because sometimes it is difficult to just use verbal communication to describe an instruction or describe which Lego brick to find and where to put them, which orientations to put them. So with the visual cues like eye gaze and hand gestures, you can just use your gaze to look at something and to use your hand gesture to show the rotation, orientation to make the task more intuitive and easy to follow. Secondly, regarding the co-presence experience, we found that by adding eye gaze and hand gestures, this significantly improved the participants' experience of co-presence, which means, for example, some participants comment that when I see the hand and eye gaze from my remote partner, it makes it feel more like a real person there working with me. And thirdly, regarding the usability and preference, most users, both on the remote side and local side, would like to have both visual cues in the system. If there was only one visual cue, the hand gesture was preferred than eye gaze, which might also be reasonable because compared with eye gaze, hand gestures are more flexible to show different locations and rotations, orientations, etc. And regarding the spatial and social presence, because we share the local environment using the 3D panorama, so according to the remote user, they feel a stronger spatial and social presence with such a 3D panorama. As they commented, they felt more like being in a real environment, and they became more aware of their partner during the remote collaboration task. So to conclude this work, in this work, we developed a mixed reality remote collaboration system, and this system can support 3D panorama live streaming and natural communication queue, as well as awareness queue sharing. We conducted a user study focusing on the exploration of hand gestures and eye gaze. We found the integration of these two visual cues can improve participants' task performance as well as enhance their experience in social presence, co-presence, spatial awareness, etc. And of course, there are some limitations of this work. So the first limitation was about a technical issue. And during the runtime, we experienced a little bit localization drifting for some participants. And such localization drifting can cause, for example, the eye gaze not at a very precise location. And this caused a little bit of confusion to the participants, to the local participants especially. And another issue was that we didn't do a very thorough conversation analysis of this, of the task. So a thorough conversation analysis might give us some indications about how the cues affect users' communication styles. And such insights may give us some ideas about the system improvement with some potential other cues. So basically, this brings me to the end of this presentation. And by the way, my personal research interests focus more on audio augmented reality. So if you're interested in audio augmented reality, or you are generally interested in audio processing or music processing, I'd also like to talk to you. Thanks a lot, and I'm ready to take your questions.
Well, thank you very much, Ying. That was a very great talk and a very cool project. So while people are getting ready to maybe write some questions on YouTube, I have a couple of questions.
Yeah.
So the first one is, when we did a related system, Remixed Reality, a couple of years ago, we noticed that there was some adaptation to the visual quality of the system, because 3D depth reconstruction is not yet perfect. I was wondering what your experiences are, if that was a confounding factor, or if people didn't notice or didn't care about that anymore.
So I would say, first of all, our participants didn't expect that the 3D sharing would be perfect. So I would say, like, they would expect some, first of all, they want to see a complete environment as reasonable detail as possible, and they want to see some depth information. So that would be good for them to have the spatial awareness. I would also say that our system, of course, is not perfect in sharing all the details. But let's say some small details, like if you have a small notebook on your desk, or if you have a pen, that's also very lookable. So I guess this would be like good enough for the participants to do a simple remote collaboration task.
Very interesting, thank you. So another question I had was with respect to scale of the system. So currently you're focused on like one kind of one local, one remote user. So what would it take for this system, or conceptually, if you were to move that to 10 local and 50 remote users? So what do you think are the main challenges in scaling up this concept, also in terms of sharing?
Well, the first thing came into my mind is the how possible that like internet can support such a streaming of information. Because like for us now, it's like one local user with Magic Leap, another remote user with the HTC Vive. So let's say if you have like 10 local users doing this all together, then I guess like the internet exchange can be a big issue. And another thing is that at the beginning of the study, we first need the local user and the remote user to first align their coordinate with each other, so that the visual cues can be exchanged at the correct positions. So if we have multiple users, this might be another thing to think about, like how do we coordinate all of these 10 people's coordinate system, and to share all the cues at correct positions for each of them.
Very interesting, thanks. So there's one question on YouTube from Christian Seiler, and the question is, in terms of cooperation, have you carried out a user study in an educational or other specific environment?
Well, that's a very, very good question, because this is also one desired application of such a system. Well, in this study, we didn't do that. We only do like a searching and placing task. But I know in some related works, also from this group's previous related works, we have some education-related user studies, like how to train people to do a puzzle task, or like basically how do you train another person to follow some instructions to do a chemistry experiment or physical experiment.
All right, I think this is also our time. Thank you very much for the great presentation, and thank
Thanks
you for the questions. So if you have any other questions for Ying, feel free to shoot her or any of the other presenters an email if you have questions, or if you just tell them that you like the talk, because this is a very different setting than if we were sitting at CHI in a room with multiple hundred people. So thank you very much, Ying.
Thanks a lot, David.
Thank you very much. So now we move to our second paper, which uses virtual reality to mitigate distraction in an open office setting. This is going to be presented by Anastasia from University of Zurich, and it's titled Transport Me Away, Fostering Flow in Open Offices through Virtual Reality. This paper is a collaboration between University of Zurich, University of Waterloo, and Virginia Commonwealth University. So Anastasia is going to show us, I believe, a recording, or maybe live. We'll see how that turns out. I think it's going to be a video, but it's definitely going to be a live Q&A. So feel free to write any questions in on YouTube. So with that, Anastasia, you can take it away. Thank you.
Hello, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Anastasia, and I'm from the University of Zurich. Today, I'm excited to present research done in a collaboration between the University of Zurich, University of Waterloo, and Virginia Commonwealth University. Take a moment to envision your ideal environment for working, one in which you're optimally focused, in the flow, and most productive. Perhaps it's an office with a view, a remote mountain cabin, an idyllic tropical beach. Just you, the waves, and no one else to distract you. Unfortunately, the reality tends to look a bit different, whether you're working from a crowded open office or you're stuck in quarantine like Dave trying to work from home. The truth is, we oftentimes can't control our work environment, and the beach remains just a fantasy. So our researchers wondered, what if instead of putting the worker on the beach, we brought the beach to the worker? And we do this through technology familiar to many of you. Virtual reality. What was once known as a medium for gaming and entertainment has now expanded to areas as broad as pilot training and medicine. What if we extended this to the common workplace? By donning on the headset, the user physically remains at their desk, but is virtually transported to their idyllic beach. Our research question follows: how would VR affect a user's concentration and ability to get into flow, a state of full engagement and immersion in the task? To investigate this question, we introduced two virtual environments. The first is a Hawaiian beach, a serene nature environment which, from past research on biophilia, we believed should foster flow. The second is an open office filmed in 3D and made into a virtual environment. This served as a control to see if the virtual factor itself has an effect. Our study included two lab settings: our baseline closed office, where the participant was left alone to perform their tasks undisturbed, and an open office where two actors worked alongside the participant and performed a script of random actions, such as occasionally making conversation with each other, typing loudly, coughing, and other actions that you may see in an open office setting. In addition, we played a background tape recorded in an open office setting for a more crowded feel and reproducibility. This resulted in the following four conditions: our baseline closed office against 3 open office conditions, with no VR, with a virtual office environment, and a virtual beach environment. We know from past research that the closed office outperforms the open one when it comes to fostering flow and productivity. So how would our two virtual environments on top of the open office measure against these two traditional settings? We asked participants to play a programming game called Lightbot in each of the conditions. In the VR conditions, the game was displayed on a screen floating in their environment. The game was played with the computer mouse in each of the conditions. The goal of the game is to light up all of the blue tiles by building the correct sequence of commands. The tasks grow increasingly challenging and require the logical thinking found in a lot of knowledge work. We recruited 35 participants across 2 countries. For each, we recorded their ranking of the conditions by preference, the number of tasks completed in the allotted time, and their mental state as measured by the flow state scale questionnaire. So how did our 2 virtual environments on top of the open office compare against the traditional office settings? Can virtual reality really foster flow and minimize distractions? Mom, yeah, I'll be down to dinner in a bit. Let's get down to the results. In the follow-up interviews, we saw that the virtual beach and the closed office ranked much higher than the actual and virtual open office environments. Now remember that the 2 virtual environments were both run in the same open office lab setting, and yet we see this huge disparity in the user preferences. The virtual beach and the closed office environment were ranked as the user's first or second favorite over 80% of the time, as compared to the other 2 conditions with less than 5%. These results give hope that virtual reality with the right environment can create an experience that comes close to that of a closed office environment. For the task completion and flow scale, we didn't notice a significant effect, which may be due to some interaction effect in the task difficulty. The light ball challenges were highly varied, making it difficult to compare against each other. However, we still saw some general trends, with the virtual beach and the closed office producing better flow than the other conditions. In addition, analyzing the 9 flow scale dimensions independently, we saw that the virtual beach was best at obtaining a challenge versus skill balance, which according to Csikszentmihalyi is integral to achieving flow. We saw some trends in the comments given by participants in the follow-up interviews. In the virtual office and the actual open office, participants complained about distractions and difficulty staying focused. When there were background noises or talking, that's when my mind was sometimes going back and forth.
Anastasia, you're muted.
I apologize for that interruption. Let me see if I can restart that.
So YouTube says, great presentation so far.
Okay, can I just restart it?
Sure.
Now, virtual reality in the workplace is still a novel concept, and we don't expect it to be widely adopted in the industry by next year. However, as the workplace continues to modernize, technologies like virtual reality are a potential solution to bridging the gap between the common but crowded open office and the luxury of a private one. One of the strengths of virtual reality is its versatility. Everyone's ideal environment is different. Think back to the one that you envisioned for yourself. On top of a mountain, under the sea, in outer space, with VR, imagination is the limit. And not only can you tailor the environment to you as an individual, but even to your current task, your current mood, your current needs.
get bored. Do you want to go back up someplace else? Nah. There are sorts of cool things to mess with in here. I know, like to go Legos around. Oh, maybe it would be nice.
All right, thank you very much for this great presentation. So Anastasia, if you turn on your video again, and then we can go to some of the questions. If you're on YouTube, feel free to ask the question on I said YouTube, and I can start. So very interesting project. So I was wondering, let's start with a YouTube question. So Kavus asked, how being in a calm environment like beach can help for getting into flow rather than mindfulness or relaxation state?
Well, I think both are perfectly applicable. It's a good question because the two require a little bit of a different environment, I guess. But with the beach, I think we could, it's both relaxing and at the same time, it does stimulate concentration. So with flow, the emphasis here is more about really being engaged in the task. And part of that is kind of removing all exterior distractions. So the two go together very closely. I would say that it really depends on the task you're working on. So for example, if you are working on a task that's perhaps more, you want to be a little bit more awake, then perhaps the environment that you're looking for is something a little bit more energetic, but still just as good at blocking off external distractions. Whereas if you're actually trying to calm down a little bit, so then also you become more concentrated on the task, then perhaps a beach would be best.
Yeah, thank you very much. Very interesting. Another question that came from YouTube was, would having a headset and no visual distraction have produced similarly positive results?
In the sense that just having like an audio headset and not having the visual factor?
Yeah, I suppose.
Yeah, so that's a good point because I think, the audio definitely already plays a huge role, which is why so many of us listen to music while we study or work. But at the same time, the visual distractions, for example, in an open office setting, can also really be detrimental to concentration. So you see people walking around in your periphery. We heard a lot of comments about that in our own study. And that itself is also very distracting. So there's two common components, both are very important. And I think if we have both, then it's, there's more positive results.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I had one more question, which is, there's the positive or the negative distraction, which you've kind of mostly tackled here, but there's also positive distraction, people coming in and you have this within an office environment. There is a lot of communication and collaboration, which makes part of it very great. So I was wondering how to essentially balance these factors, or how a system would look like that is one, reducing unwanted distraction, but on the other hand, also fostering collaboration.
Yeah, that's a really good point because we are always looking for that balance. So if you take, for example, just a closed, like a private office where you're sitting, you're really isolated from everyone else, which happens, I think, to a lot of managers in some traditional office settings. And then you have the other extreme, the open office, where you don't have the option of really, being isolated and escaping. So both are really important. You need to have your alone time to do concentrated work, and at the same time, you still need to collaborate and, talk to your teammates. So that balance is something that'll be really important to figure out. One possible consideration is maybe something more like augmented reality or virtual reality, where we still introduce some of the outside world, for example, through like the camera, like on the VR set. So perhaps we can do something where we mix like awareness of the outside and people that are trying to talk to you, and at the same time, allow you to balance how focused you want to be or how social you want to be at the moment.
Yeah, no, That makes a lot of sense. Well, thank you so much for your talk, and thank you very much for answering the questions. Also, our friends on YouTube say thank you. Thank you, Anastasia. Let join me virtually in giving Anastasia a hand. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So, and this already brings us to our last paper of the day and of the session, which is by ETH Zurich, and the presenter is going to be Andrea. So the paper is titled ELISA, Augmented Reality for Interactive Machine Learning, and it's a very nice mix of kind of AR, VR, mixed reality technology, and current advances in interactive machine learning or machine learning in general. So with that, Andrea, feel free to share your slides and take it away.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Super. So shall we start?
Yes, please.
Great. My name is Andrea Ferrario from ETH, and today I would like to share with you a short glimpse on ELISA, which is a system for augmented reality and interactive, even interpretable machine learning. First of all, I would like to stress out that the content of this presentation is based on a joint work with Raphael Weibel and Stefan Feuerriegel, both from the Department of Management Technology and Economics at ETH. And the development of the system called ELISA has been supported by ETH Innovedum, as back in 2019, Stefan and I won the Innovedum grant. So let's kick off with the problem for today, interpretability of machine learning models. We all know that machine learning models are nowadays used in thousands or even millions of different applications, impacting different societal sectors, from the financial services, of course, healthcare, going back to military operations, the job market, and education opportunities, and so on. But the ubiquity of machine learning models in application has generated concerns in society and also highlighted quite a lot of risks at different levels. Interpretability of machine learning models is essentially a desideratum of models and also a remedy to cope with these concerns and to minimize this risk. Essentially, interpretability means to explain in understandable terms either the inner workings of a machine learning model or its outcomes or predictions. However, when we have to consider machine learning models and applications, we have also to consider the fact that there are many different people with different backgrounds working on the design, conception, development, deployment, maintenance of these systems. So we have the domain experts working together with the data engineers. We have the data scientists working with the executives and the business prone people. And of course, we have to take into the considerations the expectations of end users. However, nowadays, if we have to work in the realm of interpretability of machine learning models, we are left to single user experiences and to the interfaces. Typically, we open our laptop, we work with a Jupyter Notebook or a Google Colab, we access libraries like Alibi or Dalex in R and Python, if and only if we are machine learning model saving ones, essentially data scientists. So back in 2018, I was going back to ETH and I was thinking about the following question: can augmented reality improve the interpretability of machine learning models, however, in a collaborative setting? And this is a very important point. So in 2019, actually last year, ELISA was born. ELISA is an acronym meaning Augmented Learning Experience Data Science App. And just for fun, it is a name in Hebrew, which means joyful. And it is the root of modern names like Alice, Elisa, and so on. I hope you like the acronym. So from a system perspective, ELISA is a hybrid system, which is immersive, interactive, and prone to collaboration. So it is essentially a database coordinating a workflow of 2D interfaces, laptops, 2 of them, and augmented reality immersive devices, Microsoft HoloLens. So the setting of the experience delivered by this computer system is the following. In about 40-45 minutes, 2 users have to follow requirements interacting with laptops, solve exercises manipulating holograms on their own, or at the shared workspace in the middle of the physical setting, working together on the same hologram, in order to, for example, train new machine learning model, interpret their outcomes, and answer into their line managers with their feedback. At the core of the holographic components of Alitza, we have a cube representing with a cloud of points, which are classified according to a machine learning model in the background. In this case, 2 colors, a binary classification. Each and all data points are fully interactive, as well as the labels and the variables. And throughout the experience, this main hologram is decorated with additional interfaces, which are also interactive, and which depend on the task that the user has to solve. For example, the users have to face the validation of a machine learning model that possibly led to a violation of fairness criteria, or they have to use the holographic component of Alitza in order to assess the performance of different models, like generalized linear ones. As you can see on the left-hand side, you have the decoration of the main hologram with different interfaces. And on the right-hand side, you have counterfactual explanations as holographic devices. So counterfactual explanations are a very important methodology in interpretive machine learning community. And the funny fact is, if you implement them holographically, they are extremely easy to be understood, because it is hard for people to understand counterfactual reasoning and to apply it in interpretability of machine learning models. But with holograms, they have really an immersive and intuitive way to do that. So which are the main applications of this system? Well, essentially, higher education of data science. We wanted to embed Alitza in the executive and business analytics lecture at ETH MTech already this year, but unfortunately, due to the pandemics, we have to postpone it of 1 year, but the system is ready. Then for industry, this could be a very nice tool in order to let people upskill themselves in learning environment where you have people of different backgrounds working together on machine learning, derived or driven project. And on a broader scale, for society in order to improve data science literacy of the population. So I would like to leave you actually with a few references. So the original late-breaking work for CHI 2020, you will have more information about the system and a little user study, and then some references for interpretable machine learning explanations and such. And with this, I would like to hand over to the host, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Thank you very much. Very interesting work. So while our friends on YouTube are preparing their questions, I have 1 to 3 questions, and we have a couple of minutes. So the first question that came to my mind is, why was your choice, what essentially grounds your choice in technology? Do you think there's an inherent advantage in using augmented reality versus 2D desktop computers, or maybe fully immersive virtual environments for this kind of visualization?
Yeah, that's a great question. The choice here is between virtual and augmented and 2D. So the choice between virtual and augmented is because virtual reality actually can show data much better than augmented reality from, let's say, a computing perspective. However, it's a solo experience and it is left to pure data exploration. Augmented reality allowed me to move to the physical world with a hybrid system where the holographic component does not replace 2D, but augments it, sorry for the pun, only for specified elements of the exercise. It does not make sense to take a diagram or a plot in 2D and make it in 3D for the sake of it. We have really to find elements that potentially led to an advantage in augmented reality. So from the limited user study that we did with the prototype, we identified elements that actually allow the people to perceive a benefit in understanding complexity in data and manipulating information that is rather abstract. What is an outcome? What does it mean to classify? But as the next line of research, which is also collaboration with another PhD student of mine, Michaela Bank, and with Christian Holtz from the Department of Computer Science at ETH, we want to embed Alitza in daily operations with real people. So Alitza in the field. And we will begin by targeting data scientists along the machine learning pipeline, identifying selected activities which in augmented reality could potentially lead to an improvement.
Very, very interesting. Looking also definitely forward on these follow-up and maybe seeing it in the world. I have one more question, maybe. So currently, it seems like from the paper and your presentation, the focus on your data side is more on kind of classification. And I was wondering what you think are the challenges between the different types of, if you look at different machine learning tasks, say classification versus image answering or GANs, for example.
That's very nice. So in the current setting, the system has a learning effect, right? So we had to choose something that is, from a cognitive perspective, accessible. So we believe that classification is slightly easier than dealing with continuous variables and continuous values like regression. And in particular, we embedded in Alitza a case study which has to do with credit loan that is highly understandable because people do understand what does it mean, the variable in that context, and if a machine learning model is a credit scoring one. But if we want to go crazy, I think it's not a matter of classification versus regression of generative models. The problem I see is making people understand the setting and what the variables in the data set used for training or evaluation or for generating explanations really mean. This is the core, because we can treat the model as a black box. In fact, we put on top of the black box an explanation type called a counterfactual, simply because we are not interested in the inner mechanism of it. Alitza is about post-hoc interpretation or interpretation of outcomes. So the model per se, it's not so relevant. What is relevant is what comes before the variables and the data structure and what comes after it, so the outputs. But definitely generative models and regression types, they can be used. The important thing is to embed them into an understandable case study.
Yeah, very interesting, very interesting. So I think we're perfectly on time. Then I would say this concludes our session. Thank you very much, Andrea. And please join me in thanking Andrea, Anastasia, and Ying. And also all the organizers of SwissCHI 2020, Hamid, for example, for this very great event. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah. And so, as I said, this concludes today's session. We'll see you again tomorrow at the same time, which is 3 p.m. Zurich time, with more great CHI papers, and see you tomorrow. Thank you very much.